Hello, Crashes and Taxes family. I am your host for this podcast, Crashes and Taxes, Rebecca Walser. Super glad to be with you. This podcast is on Apple and Spotify, but it's also recorded on video. So if you guys want to watch the video, definitely tune in via video. It's important if you have video to tune in via video because I am sharing slides with you guys today. And there's some technical concepts we're going to go over, and it's going to take some slides for us to do it. So if you do have video, you might want to consider this topic, especially to join the podcast on video. This is a difficult podcast for me because I don't like to ever talk about areas that I don't really know what I'm talking about in. Kind of a must if you're going to do a podcast and be on television, do news interviews, all those kinds of things. And this is a topic that nobody really has the answers to. And I am noticing a distinct pattern at super high levels of society that are pushing forward agendas and actions without telling us what the results and repercussions are of those actions. Let me just give you an example from my current MBA program that I'm pretty much now done with, graduating this year. We were talking about CSR. Have you ever heard of what CSR is? We've all now heard of ESG and, environmental, social, and governance. We all know social responsibility, governance. We all know sort of what ESG is. We all know that, companies now do a lot of voluntarily ESG reporting. That's what we are used to now. But there is something new that's coming that goes beyond ESG. I guess ESG gets enveloped into it, and it's called CSR, and it stands for corporate social responsibility. And based on CSR, there's a global plan to implement corporate governance and responsibility through regulation. So it really is state action. I'm just thinking through all these concepts, you guys, and I want you to think through them with me. See, in America, and my head has been so global for the last. I've been in the Paris module for my MBA, which is a global international class. So when I come back and I do my podcast, I have to remember, okay, I'm just focused on the impact to America, which is definitely different than the impact to the world, but in America, we have a doctrine against state action. In other words, the law cannot require or even request that private actors, corporations, do what they cannot do, what they are prohibited from doing, really through our Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments is our Bill of Rights. And so if we have a right to free speech and to petition our government under free speech, obviously the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of travel, First Amendment, so much in the First Amendment you guys don't even realize in the First Amendment through as interpreted through Supreme Court cases through the years. And we have a ton of rights. And so the government is prescribed from or prohibited from really, leveraging state action to get a corporation to do something. But in Europe, they're using the accounting rules, IFRS, which is the equivalent of our GAAP, our generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. In Europe, they're using IFRS accounting standards to set regulations for corporations. And they basically, through the accounting standards, are going to require corporations report on their corporate social responsibility and score themselves on their corporate responsibility. And these regulations, because they must be reported according to these standards that they're setting, will make companies change their behavior, because when they start having to address and analyze what those corporate responsibility things are, some that I can give you as an example: diversity on the board, making sure that you don't have a board of just older white men is really huge in the DEI world right now. Diversity and equity, inclusiveness or inclusion. So DEI is really a big thing right now. Moving from ESG to CSR is a big thing. And where does the environment and social governance stop and corporate social responsibility start? So What you're going to be seeing in this year, in 2022, is a lot of information is going to be coming out about how in the United States, the government, both at the local, state, and essentially also the federal level, has really empowered and implored private businesses to take specific action according to the government that's requesting the action. And that is a problem. That is a state action problem where the government is circumventing what it can't do by implementing policy through corporations. Now, obviously, corporations can say, well, we're private businesses. We can't force people to do business with us. But that's not really true, right? Because they can, because we don't have other options. Like, let's just take the shutdown of business through the pandemic through to a 3-year fruition. At the end of 3 years, there's no more mom and pop businesses. There's no more local restaurants, local fruit stands. There's no more local anything. It's the major, massive Fortune 100 companies that are left standing that will provide all of the things that we need. So I'm talking about, you'll get the drone delivery via the Amazon order, and you might not be visiting your local store. If you are visiting your local store, it is a Target or a Walmart. It's not a mom and pop grocer that you like to get their, fresh baked scones on Saturday morning for the weekend starting. That's not happening. So that would be where we were at if we had been 3 years into a lockdown, which was originally what they had expected we would need. And by some act of time frame, a miracle, the administration at that time, which was then Trump, decided to really push the protocols that are being used right now to get people to return back to a normal life very quickly. And so we didn't have a shutdown for 3 years. But what I'm trying to tell you is that when you have an Emergency Powers Act and you have a State of the Union that if we can shut down and anything can be an emergency, it is not going to work for businesses. It won't work for businesses in America that are independent, free, and small or medium size. It will work fine for the massive Fortune 100 plus businesses that can do okay if they're the only supplier, and if we're technically reduced and relegated to shopping online. So there's that. Is as a concern. But what is coming is these regulations. And so one of my questions, I'm always asking these questions because I want the answers. That's why I'm in these programs. I want to know as much as I can so I can relay as much to you guys as what's happening, what's going on in this world. And, when I ask about specific questions, is there a line that a corporation shouldn't pass? Is there a line where corporation stops and community and society takes over, neighborhoods take over, local elected government takes over? Where does the corporate responsibility and what the corporation says is going to happen end, and the community and the local government and the governing authorities take over? This is a political economic model. It's just called fascism. It's not like it's a new thing. Implementing policy through businesses that you can't escape because there's nowhere else to turn. And then they get to run the business however they want because you're sort of not hostage to them. You don't have to buy from them. But if you don't buy from them in their vision, where else are you going to buy from? You sort of don't have any choice in that matter. So that's a problem. And pushing the question of where does this end, that question's not addressed. And the answer that you get back is the regulations will go very, very far. And that's a concern. We shouldn't have an answer that basically there's a plan to push corporations to an extreme amount of them regulating what they're doing, which in turn, of course, impacts all of us because these are the businesses that we are shareholders in. These are the businesses that we buy from, apart from the smaller, medium size and independent entrepreneurs. These run our daily lives. So it's important that we understand where this CSR is going and how they plan to make it happen. In America, it will be problematic. You will have multinational corporation disparity, because if a corporation is subject to IFRS over in Europe, but they're not subject to anything but GAAP over here, and GAAP's not being leveraged for state action because it's not really something that's viable. through that. I think that would be attacked legally. We have issues. So I really wanted to talk today about, I'm 10 minutes in and I haven't even gotten to the subject I really wanted to discuss with you today, which is digital currency and the rise of digital currency. We have now 90 countries that are looking at digital currency. China and the UK, the most prominent. So I will start some slides with you now. Let's look at some slides here. So this is too small, so I'm going to have to go this way. And so what you can see here is this is a CNBC op-ed from June of 2021, last year, where the author, Chris and Daniel, basically talk about how basically as former leaders of the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, that they want to argue the potential benefits of a digital dollar. And they're arguing that a digital dollar, much like cryptocurrency has had a huge pull in the Gen Zers and the millennials, that the digital dollar will draw a younger, an underbanked or unbanked user to deposit money into commercial banks and reduce the friction for electronic payments. It sounds so wonderful. And that also a digital dollar is going to come anyways because of the stability and the backing of the U.S., full faith and credit of the United States federal government. So this is a positive op-ed on the digital dollar. And let's keep going here. Then we got basically this Reuters note this year, January 24, 2022. It was updated on the end of January, 18 days ago. So that would be the end of January. And you can see here a little bit before the end of January that this analysis from Reuters is saying that the digital dollar is years away because the U.S. Federal Reserve has kicked the issue back to Congress. Let me be very clear with you. The issue is with Congress. The Federal Reserve is not, let me say this again, the Federal Reserve is not a federal government institution. It is not. The only relationship is that the president appoints the Federal Reserve chairman, but it is not a federal institution. And a lot of people believe that it is a government institution. It is not. It is not. It is a private corporation. And so when we take the dollars away from the banking system where they currently are. So let me explain to you right now, you and I as Americans have no direct relationship to the Federal Reserve. We have no account at the Federal Reserve. We have no contact with the Federal Reserve. We have nothing intervolving or interrelating between us and the Federal Reserve. We use the banking system to be an intermediary. In fact, that is what banks are. Banks do what we call overnight loans at federal funds rates with the Federal Reserve, or they will loan each other money overnight. Either the Fed will loan banks money and they'll repay it overnight, or the loans now are going longer than overnight, or we are having banks lend to each other. But the Federal Reserve has a commercial institutional relationship with the banks of America and no relationship with America's people, America's citizens. The Federal Reserve uses and manipulates interest rates to control employment and inflation. So, and they use money supply to control employment and inflation. When the economy is riding rough, like it was through Corona, they stimulate money, they reduce interest rates. Of course, they weren't reduced this time because they were basically next to zero at 25 basis points. Anyways, they've been extremely low since too big to fail in 2008 and 2009. And we quantitative eased 1, 2, and 3. So we've had extremely low interest rates. As we get to a digital currency, you're going to have a direct line of communication directly to the Federal Reserve. That is going to be a two-way relationship where you personally have an account at the Federal Reserve. Basically, the Federal Reserve becomes the singular bank in the whole country. So what it will do to banks is a huge problem. Our entire banking industry could be literally, what would be the need? Would there still be a lending need? Would there still be, if we are directly taking everything digitally on real time from our real account at the Federal Reserve, then the only thing that wouldn't be covered would be if we need to borrow money. There would still be an intermediary where we need to borrow money. We have to make payments terms to go. Why couldn't we just borrow directly from the Federal Reserve? They're the ones pushing the money out to the banks in the first place, and the banks are just the ones that do all the review and analysis. So that could become easily an automated smart contract on the Ethereum platform. So it really puts the entire banking sector as a big question mark. And people don't have a good answer for that, I can just tell you. But when we hear an article from Reuters saying that the digital dollar is years away because the Federal Reserve kicked it to Congress, it's not up to the Federal Reserve. They might propose that they, go completely digital, electronic, and no longer have paper currency. But that would just be a proposal. The governing currency of the United States, I can assure you, is decided by elected people in Congress with a presidential signature. It is not something that the Federal Reserve has any legal authority to determine, period. That's it. So there's that point. But I want to talk to you now about what are the unintended consequences? Where could this go? Why are people like myself concerned that we haven't thought through the repercussions? And the best example I can give you is I am all for environmentally friendly, 1,000%, 100%. If I can use a straw that has no impact on the environment versus a straw that has an impact on the environment, I want the straw that has no impact. However, if you tell me here's your drink with ice and a lid, and here's your straw, and my straw is paper, and my straw isn't going to work beyond 5 minutes, and my drink is going to take me, 20 minutes to drink at a leisurely pace because I don't, want to drink it in 5 minutes, then the solution cannot be a paper straw. And I'll bring the paper straw to a paper airplane. We fly on real planes that are real combustion engines that are flying and using and consuming real fuel. We can't mimic that in a paper airplane. That we don't have an airplane anywhere on planet Earth known to man right now that can fly a substantial distance on alternative energy. We don't have it. So what I want to know is, before we start as a society to check all the boxes, yes, we want to save the planet in all of these ways. Yes, 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 yes. Let's discuss, let's be honest and transparent with, okay, if you have a set of regulations that you want to implement, and by the time you're implementing them that I won't be allowed to have, but one laptop and one cell phone because the energy consumption with all of the rest of the things I am used to having, that's too much and the regulations won't permit it. I need to know that if I want to be for or against the regulations. We need to know the impacts of major disruptive technology changes before we just check the box and agree. It's not that we're going to say no, that technology and advancement won't come, but maybe we have to prescribe the way in which it comes because we don't want the unintended consequences. And that's what I have a problem with. We have all this happening and all this discussion, and yet nobody is actually saying, and these regulations we project will lead to X. I have never in my life managed any kind of business, done any kind of anything where I did not, when I was projecting changes to be implemented, did not say, and here's the results we expect, and here's our milestones that we're going to measure, and here's our project deliverables. We are in a management world of here's what we want to do, and here's the expectations of the outcome, and let's all agree and move forward. We are now in a world where people are just promulgating rules, and no one's discussing the impact of those rules or whether those rules are even possible. You could literally regulate your way out of jet planes. Then you could have an entire industry that is no longer viable because it's not green. And okay, if that's what we're going to do as a society, what does that mean? That means we're in Zoom land forever. If we ever want to meet with people in Europe and Asia, if we're in America, Australia, we're just a Zoomer now. We can't fly anywhere. We can't meet people. That's the thing that people have a right to know, how these regulations are going to impact them and whether they're for them or against them, not discussing them and just saying that the regulations will take us very far with achieving what we want, and not having the society have an impact or input on how it's going to affect them is a problem for me. So I want to move on now to a bigger issue that we know. If we consider the digitization of the dollar off for a while, let's talk about something we know is happening. And that is the rise of the yuan, which is the Chinese currency renminbi, basically moving to a digital currency. Like we said, China announced, I believe, around July, August, and the UK announced around right around the end of September, beginning of October of last year, that they were both moving to digital currency. And so what you can see is that China, this is an article from the South China Morning Post dated February the 6th. And you can see here that the article is about the fact that having a digital Chinese currency will give the dollar a run for its dominance. We need to understand in America the petrodollar hegemony. In other words, when the dollar became the world's reserve currency, because we in 1944 had the biggest gold reserve in the world, still do to this day, and the gold was viewed as God's money, as something that was usable and always had intrinsic value. So we pegged initially the value of a dollar to gold. We were on the gold standard for the longest time until we finally came out completely in 71 under Nixon. And so what happened was we had the most amount of gold. Everyone wanted to have their currency tied to gold. This is when we were on the gold standard. When we came off the gold standard, the dollar was the most closely associated with the value of gold because of the reserves we had. And therefore, basically, instead of trading everything against gold, everything started trading against the dollar. The dollar was the denominated world reserve currency. This naturally led to petrodollar hegemony. So OPEC, and specifically Saudi Arabia, which really runs OPEC, and as well as Aramco, which is the Saudi Arabian petro company, they all agreed to sell their OPEC oil in dollars. And this really put dollars squarely in the face of every country that wanted to buy oil from OPEC. You got to buy it in US dollars. So a lot of countries came to us to buy our dollars, and we sell a lot of our dollars. I wish I had a slide for you here that showed you how much of our actual currency that we spend on a yearly basis do we actually collect in taxes. But since I don't have it as a slide for you, I will just go ahead and tell you that if you go to usdebtclock.org, this will give you immediate real-time results that we love. Of course, now we see the debt over 30 trillion. But I want you to see that the actual US federal spending is over $7 trillion. And you can see that our actual tax collection was 4 trillion. So that gives us about 3 trillion. That is a little over $3 trillion. That is, in fact, a total budget deficit. That's just what it is. It is, a budget problem. And so when we look at all these things and we see that this is sort of where we're at, we have to start to wonder, well, what does this mean for the dollar? If China is going to give us a run for our money, what does that mean? If we don't have to buy OPEC oil anymore, and we don't, that we've had a trickling effect of a few years now of more and more and more countries bilaterally trading directly. BRICS is an incomplete example of that I've brought up here on this podcast before. So that's Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, actually, I think. I always forget the S. And Russia. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and I believe South America, but I could be South Africa. I can remember the S. The point is that the BRICS situation is absolutely one where we are handling trades not inside of US petrodollar. And that's an example of where our dollar doesn't need to be bought in that case. And if a dollar doesn't need to be bought, then we don't sell it. And if we don't sell that dollar, and if we don't sell 3 trillion of those dollars on an annual basis, we don't have the lifestyle spending that we have. Because what does that say? When we spend 7 trillion and we've only collected 4, that means 3 trillion that we've spent, we've borrowed in the form of securities that other countries have bought because they are in US dollars. These are liabilities to us that we won't have. So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is, if you understand that the end of currency and the end of dollar hegemony, the rise of alternative currencies that can be digitized and scaled. You know, we never worried about the Chinese currency before because it was never big enough to accommodate anywhere near the amount of transactions that we have in the United States alone. But going digitized means it's completely scalable, and they will be able to. And then you can see this article right here in the South China Morning Post talking about challenging the dominance of the US dollar. Now, here's an even scarier article. This is out of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and this is talking about the flip side of China's central digital bank currency. And specifically, what I want to point out to you here is there is a system called the SWIFT system. That is how all international money settlements are mostly processed. And that is a US-based system that we have been able to unilaterally control, sanctions, monitor. If you've ever wondered, well, how do we sanction Iran? And how do we sanction China for their human rights violations? And how do we sanction all these countries? Because we can prevent them from using the SWIFT system. One thing that we have to now can be concerned about is with the rise of digital currency, for example, Russia could potentially participate with China's digital currency and avoid the SWIFT international settlement system altogether, US-based, and thereby circumventing all US monetary sanctions. And this is a huge problem. This means that we've lost our ability, or we are in the real time in front of our face right now, losing our ability to impose our will diplomatically through economic enforcement measures as opposed to actual war. This is why you're starting to see Russia and China become really cozy. They both are looking at, potentially Ukraine and Taiwan, and also a US president that they don't necessarily like. And that gives us to where we are. So this is the flip side of digital currency. And, I just don't think people have thought through, what does the digitization of the dollar mean? The digitization of the dollar, the yuan, the pound, the British pound, all of these things, you guys, bring an exponential amount of change that I have seen zero policy papers from a perspective of what does it do to dollar hegemony, to the dominance of the dollar internationally? What does it do to our ability to continue to spend $3 trillion a year that we don't collect in taxes? We're basically living 50% greater than what we would be living if we were not the world superpower with dollar hegemony. So when that ends, when these digital currencies arrive, 90 countries going for digital currencies, you guys, 90 countries. This is not going to go away. The United States is going to have to get on board somehow. And yet, if we do we then guarantee the ultimate inability to need the dollar anymore, or has that already been a foregone conclusion? And I would submit to you today that this isn't being considered. It's not being analyzed. It's certainly not being addressed and talked to mainstream level people that don't think about these big policy considerations. And what we are getting from U.S. media is that it's all good and it's probably a great solution. It's very short-sighted, and we definitely need some additional information. I will say that we are at the end of the central banks as we know it. We are at the end of the central banks and how they've been running since the 40s as we know it. What is the exact new way is what we have not yet seen. And this is one of the ways that is very concerning to me. So I hope that this gives you some food for thought. There's a lot of information that will be coming out this year that we will definitely be digesting and going through. But I just want you to understand that a digital dollar, a digital yuan, a digital pound, digital currency globally is the biggest threat to any country, the United States, for the very specific reason that we are right now the world's reserve currency. And that status has to be impacted. It is it's impossible for it not to be impacted with the rise of digital currencies. Until next week, my friends, I will wait to see you again on Crashes and Taxes. Take care. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.